So, Tales games. This is long overdue. The Tales series is a long-running franchise of RPGs made by Namco Bandai, and I was honestly completely unaware of it until I started researching the various RPG series out there to do on this show, and have been meaning to review an entry in its franchise for over a decade. Most people tell me to do Tales of Symphonia because it's the best one. No, Tales of Xillia because it has a sequel. No, wait! Tales of Vesperia! Yeah, there are too many Tales games for me to even remotely spotlight even a fraction of them. And the fanaticism over the Tales games doesn't help it. No joke, this was an argument since John and Alexis moved in with me on which one I should actually do first for the show, as they're fans of it as well, when I just have not been. Hell, this got so bad that as a Patreon request, someone got me to play Tales of Symphonia in 2020. The only reason I didn't release videos on it was they actually had to drop out of the request tier, so a script never materialized. But before they did drop out, I pretty much completed footage collection of that game. So thus, as a partial tribute to that request, and giving my 2 cents on the single most popular Tales game, I didn't really care for it. I thought the story far too frequently bashed its protagonist Lloyd as being an idiot, despite it being very clear that his educational instructor was treating someone who learned best via different means than which they taught, and in turn punished them in ways which disincentivized them actually retaining the information he was then berated with, especially by Lloyd's presented skill as an artisan and creative thinker to resolve complex problems, showing that he isn't stupid, he was just taught badly by someone attuned to only teaching via book learning, which Lloyd learned the worst from. Everyone kept trying to treat the guy as if he should be held to the expectations of a scholar, which is just frankly unreasonable as he's not a scholar, and his talents do not lie in scholarly pursuits. And that overshadowed a lot of the better parts of Symphonia for me, especially as other characters are proven repeatedly that their conduct is wrong, yet the story does not treat such as so. Thus, it likewise didn't come off as a coming-of-age story to me, where a kid from a mountain village has to become wise to the world as he realizes how big it is. Which seems to be a common criticism I have of the ones I've played. It might not be reflective of all of them, just the ones I've gotten to. I also felt jack-all about the relationship between Lloyd and his intended paramour Colette, which might have been different had I had access to the Japanese voice track, since Colette was one of the first voice acting roles of singer Nana Mizuki. Shinta is best girl, though. Her arc, I felt, was one of the strongest in the game, and I can see why others may like it, but it really just was not for me. Granted, that probably was not helped by the fact that the only version I could get my hands on was the PS3 version. And the PS3 version, well, sucks for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to requiring you to gamble to unlock the best weapons in the game. Whereas the original GameCube version explicitly did not. I heard about how much worse the 2023 remaster is, and my condolences to Symphonia fans for it. And for the record, at this point, no, I won't do a Symphonia review if asked. I'd probably end up pissing off more people if I did. Honestly, the Tales game I have wanted to do for the longest time is the one I'm doing now, Tales of Grace's F. And by the footage I'm showing you, you should understand why. Yes, you are seeing this on your screen. This is Tales of Grace's protagonist, Aston Lhant, dressed up as Haseo from .hack.gu in his X form. Yeah, the reason I wanted to do this game was because of the character costumes that turned Asbel into Haseo. And in addition to that, there are also ones that turn the cast into the main characters of Code Geass. Plus CC, as CC is a story device and not a main character. This is all, in fact, an actor allusion to Asbel's Japanese voice actor, Takahiro Sakurai. Sakurai is ubiquitous to a lot of series with his performances, being responsible for voicing Suzaku Kururugi in Code Geass, Haseo in all .hack media to date, and even roles like Cloud Strife in anything they've had him with a voice to date. Thus, a lot of Asbel's portrayal is carried by Sakurai, and in homage to depictions of prior roles of his, which as a result play part in analysis of his character with how he contrasts against them. And it's because he was cast to play Asbel that Namco Bandai did those character costume packs with the franchises they owned, which deepens how this story and its depiction of the cast ends up in parallel to other characters. Hell, this goes a step further. Tales of Graces originally released in 2009 for the Nintendo Wii, and as cross-promotion with Dot Hack for these costumes, Link likewise got Tails character costumes for several of its characters. Which really just made Link worse when you think about it, as those character costumes make no sense in Dot Hack's setting. But with a lot of companies doing cast crossovers, the reuse of Aspel as a character in the more recent Tales of the Rays mobile game eventually led to said game including Haseo and Adelie from Dot Hack GU as crossover characters during said game's tenure as part of their Glorious Unreality event, as both Sakurai and Adelie's Japanese actress, Ayako Kawasumi, were already voicing characters in the game, so it made sense to include them. Like, just look at this roster of special DLC characters Rays has, and it's kind of crazy. And this fact of Aspel's character is actually part of why Aspel remains one of the most beloved Tales protagonists of the franchise. Or at least, so I have been told. And that's even in spite of the failings of the game he comes from, or how one might feel about Takahiro Sakurai himself regarding some recent revelations about his conduct within his personal life, which we're not getting into as they don't exactly affect his professional life. Look them up yourselves if you're curious. But with that all said, let's get this out of the way. Despite Aspel being one of the beloved protagonists of the Tales games, Tales of Graces is not considered a good Tales game by either fans or critics, who largely love the gameplay systems of Graces, but are decidedly more mixed to negative about how it handles the relation and content of its story. I'll get more into why as we go along, but its negative stigma is not just because it's where the franchise had to put on the brakes, as it did so poorly after several years of glutted releases, literally releasing 1 to 2 games a year for several years, but is heavily tied into how, much like my problem with how Symphonia treats Lloyd, Graces outright scapegoats Aspel as being the cause of everything that is going wrong by his quote-unquote selfish decisions causing the convergence of events that make everything go wrong. But if you actually pay attention to what's depicted, he's not actually responsible for most of them, nor even is the one that sets them off. And for the ones he is, his responsibility is so small in playing part to it that it's ultimately insignificant in contrast to the blame others are guilty or responsible of. Merely being in the wrong place and time as a series of events already in motion tip the scales of the world into its resulting chaos, which he does not have the means nor ability to stop in the moment in which they occur. Had he not been there or not done the things he does, then everything the story presents as happening would not just have still happened, but been worse, with exception to a few incidents where it's likewise hard to blame him. However, that is never acknowledged internally in the story as being so, and it is an extreme rarity, bordering on non-existent, do those that scapegoat him apologize for their fraudulent behavior towards him, and the actually guilty parties are never, not once, held responsible for such throughout the entire story. The game is entirely oblivious to who is the actual cause and instigator of everything going wrong, despite presenting the evidence of who actually is. Thus, you can see why I decided to package this in with the others in this year of Code Geass adjacent reviews, as the same root problem that Code Geass showcases is also Grace's downfall, despite changing major aspects and arcs concerning the counterpart analog characters to try and amend them, and ultimately screwing up as what they change or do with them wasn't really what should have been much of the time. And that's even dissociated from the other series illusions one could make. And as a result of that, you end up hating a fair portion of the focused upon cast and feel frustrated with much of what the game does that literally bends over backwards to blame Aspel, despite all the signs of the setting that things were bad regardless of him, which he is doing his best to fucking fix with what he has. while other solutions are only doing more harm. But I'll present that as we go along, as more frustrating than the game itself was the job I went through to even get it working. As here's the other thing about the game. The English dub for it outright sucks. Partly due to the voice direction being terrible, and partly due to just plain outright miscasting for much of it. Of most prominent note being Bryce Papenbrook being cast as Aspel, as he is just wrong for the character. And because he's gone on to be part of Sword Art Online's anime dubs, yeah, I was not going to put up with hearing the voice of Kirito coming from a character dressed as a Seo. No, just no. This would be a different story entirely if Bandai had gotten Yuri Lowenthal for the role to continue the times Yuri has done the English dub of a Takahiro Sakurai voiced character. It has happened multiple times, seriously, look it up. But I'm pretty sure he was busy with other projects at the time, regardless of whether he auditioned for the role or not. But the performances in said English dub just made the story all the more grating and accent the negative. It's actually why an undubbed patch was made for the game by fans, and is considered by most players of it to be the ideal way to play the game, as Bandai of America at the time refused to allow multilingual audio tracks in games, despite the storage space for such allowing for them. And trying to get that version of the game to work is actually what took me so long to actually review it. Made worse is that the undubbed version, yeah, it's the only way to get the Japanese exclusive DLC that has the Haseo and Code Geass costumes, alongside a few other extras that, for some stupid reason, Bandai of America refused to release in Western markets, and in fact removed entirely the capacity of the English release of the game to interface with said DLC in the event you create a foreign PSN account to buy it off of their region. Which I did. Like, these days, you set up a Singapore PSN account and you can buy any region-exclusive DLC from that region, at least if it is available in Asian English markets. And you can get it to work with any related game you're using. But not so when Bandai of America got their hands on this one. It doesn't make sense for them to deny such either, when you remember that Bandai 100% owns the IP rights to every series that got involved as DLC. And at the time the game released, they were also the company that imported all 3 series. Thus, there were zero rights conflicts to make them redact the Dot Hack and Code Geass costumes when Tales of Grace is released. There has never been a valid reason given for why they did not make those costumes available, as the standard ones some might cite for why an import is lacking something do not apply. And as a result, the undubbed ROM files are the only way to experience the game with everything intended to be part of it and present the themes and parallels it was meant to. And you're not in for an easy time getting that software to work either. PlayStation 3 emulators absolutely hate Tales of Grace's software, in a large part because of the mods that had to be done to the English version of the game to put back in the data Bandai of America took out. More pertinently, though, is the game runs at different frame rates at different times. In battle, the frame rate spikes to 60 FPS to speed up depiction of the battle, and skipping frames and rendering because more is going on in the battle, which thus means resource expenditure needs to be cut down. However, when you're out of battle, the game naturally runs at 30 FPS, allowing for smooth character animation and a greater sense of, well, personality with the emoting of the cast in the skits and in-game cutscenes. Console emulators ideally want the system to stick with a single consistent frame rate throughout, and it is an excruciating pain to try messing with settings every time you fight a battle. Made worse that if you're not playing things at the right frame rates, then the audio for cutscenes completely desyncs, making for an entire unwatchable mess. And as a result, I spent over a week, and this is individual days week, not a consecutive week, trying to jailbreak a spare PS3 I have in an attempt to get the modified ROM files to install onto its hardware and trick the game into running on it, so the PS3's inbuilt processor could just take care of the mess for me without any conflicts. And unfortunately, despite me doing everything right to install the system crack correctly, installing the Undub ROM files didn't work. I'm not entirely sure why, and I didn't have the time to ask the help forums for jailbreakers as, yeah, PS3 jailbreaking is pretty much dead by this point. So I just reset the PS3 I cracked to factory settings to undo the jailbreak, and went back to playing with the emulator settings to try and get it to work. And that is when I happened across a stroke of luck, which allowed me to not call this entire thing a wash. The YouTube channel Geek Sentai produced a guide in 2020 that detailed the best version of the PS3 emulation software and the setting combo that actually got Graces to run properly. Apparently more current versions of the software completely destroyed the frame rate management system that guts Grace's ability to work with it, thus leading to 99% of the problems players have had since. If you want it to work, you need to obtain this listed version of the software. As of writing and recording this video, that is the most recent version it works with. Then, you need to adjust the settings of the emulator so the frame rate limit of the game is set to 60 FPS, and then in the Advanced Details tab, change the V-blank frequency to 30 Hz. I have the full list of settings I ended up using on screen right now, but those two settings are the key to getting this to work right, as it allows the software to remember to actually shift between frame rates as the game requires they be shifted. Now, unfortunately, when I recorded my footage, not everything worked the way it's supposed to. I still had times when I was playing where frame rates dropped like mad due to processing demand. There were several in-game artifacts that didn't render properly, in particular, the ring that exists around the planet where the story takes place. I'm using Geek Sentai's footage of said ring right here to showcase what it's supposed to look like, and this is what I had to put up with. I spent another day trying to fix this to no avail. And for some reason, there were also sections of the game that were lacking audio. I presume in this last case that I might have had a problem with missing or corrupted files made possible by the Undub, but frankly, by this point, it's hard enough to just get copies of the Undub and the DLC pack atop that. Though using the Undub for the game is not without its drawbacks, as despite restoring the Japanese audio for the game, there is a lot of content in the Tales games that have absolutely no captions to them. So if you are not someone that understands Japanese, you will be missing out on the context of that content. In specific, being everything related to battle sequences where party members end up interacting, both in battle and at the end of battle, where characters frequently have post-victory skits, which, yes, are influenced by the character costume sets. And this problem frustratingly still persists in modern games that permit one to access the alternative audio tracks, Xenoblade Chronicles and Persona 2 specifically, that forget to have a caption for all spoken lines in their games. I don't know why that is still a thing at this point, though at least the fan Undub has a better justification for such, as all it did was restore audio tracks and DLC that should have been part of the release to begin with. But as you can probably guess, spending as long as I did trying to get this game to run did not leave me in a positive mood with respect to grinding through it. Thus, I abused the grade system. The grade system is a staple to the Tales series, whereby if you've completed the game before, then depending on your playtime and completion percentage of its content, you can assign grade points which will allow you play bonuses in any New Game Plus you might attempt. The bonuses including retaining all learned skills and titles. Titles being a mechanic of the game where you unlock special stat bonuses, costumes, and abilities by obtaining and applying said titles. Keeping the inventory and cash you got last game, your completion of data primers about the game's enemies, and any recipe you might have for things you may craft, such as complex foodstuffs or even upgraded weapons. There are even experience gain and drop rate modifiers, so you don't have to worry about grinding enemy encounters for level ups. As with the modifiers on, then just the random encounters you have when walking from location to location is enough to level up. And to that end, I pulled a perfect completion save file from GameFAQs and used it to flag my game as a New Game Plus run with all that crap unlocked. What can I say? I did not have a good time with Symphonia's grind, and by the time I started working on footage capture for this game, I had spent most of the year in question working 60-hour weeks and was exhausted. I was not in the mood after all that effort to even get it to run, to put up with doing it all from zero when I had an alternative right there when I was emulating it anyways. Again, I don't normally do this, but I was just so exhausted I didn't feel like I had another option. Moreover, and this is my critique of the grade system, everything except experience and drop rate modifiers should be part of the standard package of any New Game Plus run. It should not be locked off as a currency the game arbitrarily calculates, where you have to pay those points to gain access to something you should be getting as part of New Game Plus by default. Now, if you're going to make it an option so the players themselves can decide if they want those play bonuses or not, fine. I just don't like such being locked off by a currency system. Allow it to be a toggled option when starting a New Game Plus run on whether you get a given bonus or not, and make the grade points revolve around the rate modifiers. That, I feel, would be more fair. I have no idea if more recent Tales games than this one have implemented that. If so, that's great, but if not, it's something they need to do. Anyways, to finally begin, the game opens in the childhood arc with the main cast several years before the story's main events begin, with our protagonist Aston Lhant and his brother Hubert heading out to a hill above the town where flowers bloom year-round, which Aston's father, Aston, has barred the pair from visiting. And this is where it starts. You see, the problem that underpins everything about Aston's animosity with his father is Aston does not, at any point, explain himself, his actions, or his reasoning towards those he is affecting by his actions. He just expects blind obedience from everyone, including, but especially, his children, and believes his word is right, is the final say in any situation, and there is no room for argument. Aspel and others chafe at this, as he needs reasons which Aston refuses to give, as Aston has no legitimate defense to provide. When he doesn't get such, Aspel, because he is an inquisitive child with a spark of adventure in his heart, goes out to experience that for himself because he has not received a valid explanation for why he should not do something. This isn't just stupid kid logic either. In the real world, people are not just going to defer to what you say if you cannot justify one simple question to them.
Why?
By right of superior intelligence, I am best suited to guide the destiny of this planet.
Why?
My empirical powers give me the mandate.
Why?
Because it's something I want to do!
A large part of how the game tries to frame Aspel as the irresponsible asshole in all this is largely pinned on this fact. His impulsive disobedience towards Aston, which starts literally from the first scene of the game and is a running motivator throughout the childhood arc. And yet, without a valid reason given to him, Aspel has no reason to listen, especially due to the abusive way in which Aston treats the brothers. For any time Aspel acts in any way rebellious thanks to Aston not explaining himself, he doesn't punish Aspel for the actions Aspel committed, he instead punishes Hubert for such, as Hubert should have stopped his brother. But Hubert doesn't because he can't find fault in Aspel's logic thanks to Aston not giving them a valid reason to prevent the course of action Aston doesn't want them to do. And by all evidence, Aspel's actions have never gotten them in any serious harm. So the only reason they would be punished is out of just disobedience, which, as said, is Aston's own fault. And the legitimacy of his commands is itself undermined by Aston only punishing the one who was not responsible for the decision made, and this inciting an ever-escalating cycle of rebellion as Aston's punishments only further encourage Aspel to act out against his asshole of a dad That by his own actions has proven Aspel's own point that he is not one to be respected when he can't even justify the punishments he metes out to those who are innocent of the crime committed. For even when Aspel freely offers himself up to be punished, shielding those who went along with him, Aston still refuses to do so, and instead inflicts such on everyone else. Not just reinforcing how invalid those actions themselves are, but invoking the Knight complex Aspel himself is shown to develop, where he wants to protect those in his charge. And this is part of my entire thesis on the game, and its scapegoating of Aspel, as you're supposed to agree with Aston in this, that Aspel is escaping the punishment he is due, and the game treating him terribly is supposed to be the delayed consequences of not conforming to what others demanded of Aspel, until he is literally forced to do so. But the more you pay attention to all the bits that the story tries to brush under the rug, the more you realize the reverse is actually true, and Aspel is instead paying for all of the sins of the father. And that is why this episode is called that, as the childhood arc provides the preliminary evidence on how much of a scumbag Aston Lhant actually is, which the story itself deliberately ignores. I said this game possesses Code Geass parallels, and this is one of the first and most influential towards that. For despite Takahiro Sakurai voicing Aspel, Aston Lhant is the Suzaku Kururugi equivalent, and the longer story of the game is nearly all hinged on Aspel paying the consequences of his father's actions, all motivated by Aston's belief that he, and he alone, is the one in the right. Moving on, Aspel and Hubert make it to Lhant Hill, and we see why some might consider it off-limits, as the hill is actually more of a cliff face that would be easy to fall off of if someone isn't paying attention or escorted there. And really, that's the big issue at hand which precedes these events. Aspel and Hubert keep wanting to go there, Aston's too busy to escort them despite repeatedly promising to them he will, and he refuses to assign anyone to take them to keep them safe when he reneges on those promises, as he can't spare the manpower to do so. Which, as I'll explain in a bit, is also his own damn fault. What's more, a parent that demands blind obedience while repeatedly breaking their own promises and punishing the innocent party is not one that engenders trust, respect, or understanding from their children. Regardless, the flowers blooming year-round here is because the area is constantly renewed by the magical element Eleth that runs through the region. Specifically, the Eleth that originates from the girl that they find here. This girl has amnesia, and Aspel decides he wants to help her. So since they found her among the flowers, and Aspel having to prevent her from falling over a cliff presents that they can't leave her alone lest she unintentionally harm herself, they eventually decide to name her
Tiger Festival.
Actually, no, they name her Sophie, derived from the flower Sopharia, many of which grew on that hill. The brothers bring Sophie back to the town of Lhant, part of the country of Windor, which their family are the stewarding lords of on behalf of Windor's monarchy, which they have a close relationship with. Lhant is a border town with the accompanying country of Fendel, and likewise is an important commerce route leading to the port town that connects Windor to Strata, the company that makes up the western continent of the map. On top of that, it is responsible for the collection of wind elemental eleth from the air currents of Windor that are released upstream of them being converted into harvestable crystals thanks to the immense number of windmills that are peppered all around the region. As the primary economies and the magic system of the game is all founded upon possession of crystals that harness eleth in them, and controlling eleth maintains the balance of power on the planet's oid, Lhant is, in essence, the single most important plot of land, as whoever controls it controls not just 1/3 of the eleth crystal supply, but also maintains the delicate political and trade balance required to maintain the region and requires a deft hand, and open borders for that trade, for such to not eventually lead to war. Guess what Aston has been fucking up for everyone? As they enter the town, they're met by Cheria Barnes, a lifelong friend of the siblings, her grandfather working as the Lhant's butler, but one who suffers from a breathing illness implied to be asthma. Cheria is heavily crushing on Osbald and wants to be taken seriously by him, trying to join in on his adventuring, but Osbald takes seriously how heavily Cheria's illness debilitates her, thus doesn't like bringing her along out of concern for her well-being. Which, as an 11-year-old, that concern comes off a lot more abrasive due to him wanting her to stay home, thus is deliberately being an ass to her as a form of discouragement. Unfortunately, that doesn't work because Cheria is presented as being a tsundere, and such actions tend to backfire when used against them. In practice, she isn't, but it's what they're trying and failing to make as her trait. Though Cheria's own insecurities lead her to be catty to Sophie without cause, which completely goes over Sophie's head, but from the audience's perspective does not leave our first, nor subsequent, impressions of Cheria with any positivity towards them. Again, the story is trying to present Cheria as someone for the audience to be endeared to with how Osbald's actions unilaterally upset her, especially as she has affections for him. But in execution, not so much.
その時は一生責任持つ
一生ってそんなのダメったらダメ絶対ダメ
It instead coming off as Cheria being the one who's being selfish and inconsiderate by not accepting, hey, there's things they can't do with her because of her illness. I'll expand on this more, but this is one of the reasons why the tsundere flag with her is at best debated, as the trait doesn't come off well when the character is being selfish. But Osbald's true feelings are shown as one of the reasons he wanted to visit the hill and its flowers is so he could give one of them to her, which calms her down and allows her to learn of Sophie's situation. The preteens go around town, trying to see if anyone knows anything of her, and no such luck on that front. This entire section used to familiarize players to the exploration and dropped item mechanics of the game. You can collect a lot of the game's resources just from random drops around the region, many of which replenish on their own, as well as the Tales series staple story event cutscenes known as skits. While normally full in-engine cutscenes carry the large narrative beats with them punctuated with full animated cutscenes, smaller story segments that more focus on regional lore and character moments inevitably punctuate one's exploration of the whole game, and help immensely in fleshing out the setting and allowing more time with cast members than the main storyline's progression itself would allow. I do have a critique of the skits, however, and that is a lot of them are played more for comedy than anything, with that comedy being at the expense of a cast member instead of in lead up to a valid punchline. I had the same experience with the Symphonia as well. I felt the skits, when they were focused on being comedic, wanted us to laugh at and denigrate a specific cast member instead of setting up a proper comedic scenario. There's one later in the game where Osbald's night shift trainer shows the abnormal way in which Osbald learned, as it was really effective for him, but wouldn't be for others. What this skit showed is that Osbald more needed guidance than strict training to bring out his full potential, which he was already driven to achieve, versus specific strict step-by-step instruction that was less helpful, as such instead strangled his potential, which itself is a reflection of the story-long characterization of Osbald, where he is stifled in strict, structured environments unless he respects those instructing him, as it's not like he can't do the tasks given to him with a bit of leeway and an understanding of the reasoning behind them. But what that skit wanted out of it was to, once more, call out a character of being an idiot that can't do things the normal way, and want us to point and laugh at them for it. This isn't every skit. Most of them are just endeavoring to derive humor out of character interplay, but it happened frequently enough that it annoyed the crap out of me in both Tales games I've finished. This leads to the ultimate confrontation with Aston as they finally come to him in attempting to help Sophie find where she belongs. The boy's mother, Kerri, greeting them as they return home, and alerting Osbald that the shouting from the elder Lhant is inevitable, as Osbald cannot, in Aston's eyes, do a single thing right regardless of Osbald's acts of rebellion, and it has gotten to the point that even Kerri automatically thinks the worst of him in complete echoing of Aston's ridicule.
連れ出されて体も辛いでしょ。
そんなことしてないって。
あなたはラント家の跡取りです。もう少し周りの者に対して思いやりを持ちなさい。
And he was doing exactly that! Are you starting to see what I mean about the game constantly putting Aspel in the wrong when he was endeavoring to do the right thing in the given situation he finds himself in? Granted, that specific line, that is on Cheria, as Kerri thinks that Aspel is dragging her everywhere despite her condition, when it is Cheria herself that invites herself along. But once more, patterns of behavior!
なんだよ、もう母さんまで。
Oh yes, Kerri is just as bad as Aston, as she enables and stands behind his crap in complete deference. Which really isn't surprising considering the woman's Stockholm Syndrome. I'm not kidding on that. 12 years before this, Kerri first came to the Lhant home as a potential suitor to Aston. Their first meeting went terrible and she wanted nothing more to do with him. But she was denied an escort home because Aston took all available resources around the city to settle a border skirmish with Fendel, which took over a month despite the border literally being right next to town. And in that time, he ordered her to pass it by tending to the flowers on his property. By the time he got back, she didn't want to leave, and Aspel was conceived soon after. The symptoms of Stockholm Syndrome? Positive feelings towards a captor or abuser, sympathy for the captor's beliefs and behaviors, and negative feelings towards police or other authority figures that aren't them. Throughout the game, Kerri presents all of these and never once acts against anything Aston ever did. While I admit, this is my interpretation of their relationship, Kerri spends the entire game bending over backwards to justify the unjustifiable out of Aston, to try and frame his horrid behavior as caring and righteous and empathetic and... No, I cannot agree with that. If she's not, then she's just as guilty regarding what she allowed to happen. As for when we actually get to Aston, in the context of Aspel taking in a girl that has no memories and nowhere to go and trying to help her, well, that's how someone who is the steward of the land or training to replace them should be acting. Noblesse oblige. The inferred responsibility of privileged people to act with generosity and nobility towards those less privileged or in need. This should be a good thing. A sign that Aspel is trying to be responsible, that he takes his duties as a member of the Lhant family to those in their territory seriously, that he is a kind and generous individual and wants to help those around him, and such is a good sign for Aston's own stated goals, as he's named Aspel as his heir and successor to all Aston's own responsibilities in maintaining the territory, so should be given some responsibilities so he may learn how to best respond to situations he may encounter in the future. And if one thought that, you would be 100% wrong. For as I said earlier, this isn't about Aspel, this is about Aston, and is all about obedience to Aston's orders, regardless of what came from it. Aston doesn't give a shit about helping find where a lost little girl actually belongs, or that Aspel's own actions permitted him to help someone as is beholden to the duties of their position. In fact, while it isn't addressed immediately in the story, Aston intends to shove Sophie off in an orphanage in the capital far away from anyone who could help her, and just wipe his hands and forget about the entire mess as it's not their problem, assuming outright that Sophie would agree to this herself without ever once talking to her, and everyone involved should just accept his judgment as the best for them all, even as both Aspel and Sophie disagree, because he refuses to talk to them, only talk at them, and expects them to blindly obey.
それと、その少女だが、私の方で預かろう。
You are literally the authorities for the region!
お前のような無力な子供が人の面倒を見られるはずがあるまい。
やってみなくちゃわからないだろ。
I mean, he couldn't possibly do any worse a job than the one Aston's been doing, considering all the responsibilities he shirked, while his efforts were focused on the vendetta Aston spent over a decade carrying out. Long story, I will get to it later. Furthermore, Aston has never entrusted anything to Aspel, so Aston has no understanding of what Aspel is capable of. Why do you all at home think Aspel has such immense disdain for his dad? As Aston's attitude really is, do as I say or else. Beyond ridiculing his sons, Aston actually called them in to tell them that a boy around their age will be coming to stay with them, and he is not to interact with them in any way. Said boy is in fact Prince Richard, heir to the Kingdom of Windor. You know, the country that Lhant is part of. He's coming to stay with them because Aston has a good relationship with the king. Thus, he trusts Aston with Richard's life. And you would think that Aston would try to engender some positive relationship between his son and the next king of the land by permitting them to become friends while he is here, as Aston has already designated Aspel as his heir, so they will be working together in the future regardless. And you would once more be wrong to think that. And Aspel likewise doesn't understand this completely irrational decision. But once more, this is an example of Aston refusing to explain his actions behind his orders and demands because he can't justify them, just expecting them to be obeyed with the most half-assed of rationales that doing things wrong to him would destroy the Lhant family, which itself is an indistinct excuse contrary to his own goals, as such isolation would make Richard believe that he's an outcast while he's here. But orders given without reasons, especially when they are against the best interests of one or more people, are ludicrous to be expected to be followed, especially from someone that is over time shown to be as irrational as Aston is. Especially because of everything going on around Richard and his father that even required the prince be away from the capital to begin with. For, unsurprisingly, there is a coup d'etat plot against the pair being performed by the king's brother, Cedric. And Aston is aware of it. You know who isn't? The king. Once again, this is how bad his decision-making is. I am addressing this early as it helps recontextualize the game's plot entirely, but one of the side quests far later in the game provides as its reward the recollections of a royal official regarding the meeting between Aston and Cedric, where said man lays out his plans to overthrow his brother's rule of the kingdom, which requires partnership with Strata, and Aston refusing to take part in it, alongside Aston's refusal to inform the fucking king of the land, who he has sworn his loyalty to, and is his duty to inform him of his brother's treachery. The official who saw this viewed the act as a brave, defiant stand attesting to Aston's loyalty to the crown, especially due to Cedric's control over several financial and military fields that has in the years since this left the Lhant lands to lose support and resources from the crown in retaliation. For even at the point in the childhood timeline, Lhant's local economy has taken devastating damage and they are beginning to be short on the manpower needed to safely defend the lands from monsters and attempted invaders, especially because Aston keeps antagonizing Fendel and has kept borders to the country closed for years, which I will explain in a bit. But it is in reality a testament to Aston's sheer arrogance, as he expected the man to obey his words and break off from his plan to overthrow his brother just because he said to. And worse, despite knowing full well that his treachery was afoot in the shadows of the country, he didn't inform the king of it, nor do anything else about it. And one could presumably say that Aston didn't have any evidence to back up his claims, that there's no reason why the king would believe Aston's word against that of the king's brothers. And again, no! During the childhood arc, Aspel swings around in battle a sheathed sword that he found in a closet which he can't draw the blade of. In fact, no one can draw the blade, because the sword is locked inside of the sheath. As a later side quest reveals atop this, the sword is actually the royal weapon of the Wingdor Kingdom, and is only out of the hands of the royal family when it is bestowed to an individual who has been shown to possess loyalty to the crown that is above reproach, and their word to be trusted in all matters. It was given to Aston by the king when Aston saved the king's life, and is a sign that the king would listen to even at the bare minimum a warning about a potential plot to overthrow the crown. And yet Aston has done nothing, nor will do anything, because he couldn't give a shit beyond the appearance that he was making trouble when he had a duty and responsibility as a loyal noble to the crown to speak out. Hell, this is made worse by the fact that the reason Richard even was sent to the Lhant lands for his care was because the king implicitly trusts Aston. So, again, even without that future knowledge, the reason why Richard is even here is because Aston has the capability to end this plot himself and yet did nothing. Even worse, that sword that was entrusted to his care by the king? Yeah, Aston ends up being given the ring that is the key that unlocks the sword. He doesn't discover this until late in the story, but when he finally does draw the sword, it's an entire piece of junk because it was never cared for once since it was given to Aston, because he originally rejected the ring as well from the king, which was required to unsheath it. And that really represents everything about Aston as well. He coveted the positions he took for himself: Lord of Lhant, trusted by the king, husband, father, exalted protector of the land, but wanted none of the responsibilities attached to them, and once they served their use, those responsibilities were tossed aside for what he wanted. And I'm not even done with the examples yet.
万が一のことがあれば我がラント家の家名に傷がつく。わかったか、アスベル。
Position over duty. That is Aston Lhant. Are you getting at why I get pissed off at this game crapping on Aspel while Aston's misconduct gets a free pass? It's complete thematic hypocrisy. And oh yes, that is all relevant, as Aspel and Aston arguing over Sophie's fate is tabled when a monster attack strikes the caravan of travelers that include Richard among them, one that quickly overwhelms the Lhant militia, as their membership is dropped like a stone between Aston's grudge against Fendel and the reduction in resources the crown has awarded to Lhant in the aftermath of Aston refusing to play ball on the coup plot. As a result, they don't have the manpower to repel even this small an attack due to how thinly stretched they are. It actually taking Aspel defying his father and going out there with Sophie and Hubert to distract just one of the monsters to break the encirclement, free up the guardsmen needed to press off the attackers, and have this small group hold them off while Chariot does her part in leading those part of the caravan to safety, which permits the guards to more actively go on the offensive to kill the stronger monsters present. While one could write this off again as reckless, it once more contextually is not, as recklessness is to act without thought. Aspel quickly analyzed the situation, found the weakest target he knew he and his companions could safely deal with, formulated a plan with them that would maximize their chances of success while not hindering those already in combat, drew away the perfect target to achieve the objective, and executed that plan flawlessly. This was so well done that a member of the Royal Guard even offers to permit him entrance into the Knight Academy on his recommendation. They are that impressed by Aspel's decision-making and assistance in this matter, as the guards were not going to pull off a win without some form of casualty without intervention. But of course, that doesn't matter to Aston, because even with good reasons for Aspel's actions, and performed in such a way that they would not come to harm, Aspel still openly and knowingly went against him, and they must be punished for that. Even though, if you look back at their conversation, Aston never barred them from helping until the point it was already too late, and them withdrawing then, without doing anything, would only have made the entire situation worse. Hell, it's because Aspel did what he did that Aston avoided the consequences of his own incompetence. And we see another Suzaku parallel in that Aston feigns fealty to one in a higher position of authority, but notice how he does not actually admit to having been wrong in his actions, with Aspel calling exactly that shit out in its insincerity, while Aston still expects himself to be obeyed. This is where we meet Richard, who acts as the game's Lelouch analog, with him, as said before, sent here with a small guard force to try and get away from assassins. Aspel trying to be nice and adherent to the duties of nobility in his endeavors to bridge a connection with him, as he can easily tell the guy is lonely. And he is, for Richard has been isolated from everyone around him his entire life. And it helps to be the Lelouch analog with some of what comes later, plus the story viewed through the lens of two kids meeting and becoming friends in youth, paying off years later as they grow up. Also, he's the one with the Lelouch character costume after the time skip.
僕に取り入ろうとしても無駄だ。なんだと？どうせ僕の関心を買って利用しようと思っているんだ。いつもそうだ。僕に近づいてくるのはそんな奴らばかり。
Again, a reason why Aston insisting that Richard stay alone while here is really bad, as it's only reinforcing a caustic mentality that will leave Richard unhinged in adulthood, incapable of performing the duties of his station, who might bring the entire kingdom to ruin if not corrected by giving him any form of friendship. Can I foreshadow this any harder? One of his guards comes in to take him to train, but Richard's not up to it, Aspel offering to take it in his place so he doesn't just get beaten into the ground. This itself is a warning flag for an event that comes not much later, as this guard, Bryce, is in on the coup, and was not the one that was supposed to perform this lesson, as he's not even a swordsman, and only fights with a claw, which is a horrible tool to assist one who is to be trained in fencing-style swordsmanship, as Richard is. And coming to Richard's defense in this matter not only shows Aspel's true maturity in acting to protect those he can from bullies, again, his acts of rebellion better characterized as not bowing to a bully, but likewise gains a semblance of trust from Richard, as he did this in his favor without expecting anything back. This is, however, where Aspel makes a mistake, but once more from my view is an understandable one, as he offers to take Richard to see the sights of the city, including Lhant Hill. However, because both Richard and Aspel distrust authority figures, Aspel because everyone in town is subservient to his father, and Richard because he knows there are traitors among his guard that are part of the coup, neither of them tell anyone what they are doing or where they are going, which as they view the beautiful sunset from the cliffside, allows Bryce to come in and attempt to kill Richard, allowing him to likewise blame this all on the Lhants by throwing his corpse off the cliff and make it seem like an accident.
So our accident is not an accident at all.
Now again, Aspel's mistake in this is he didn't tell anyone. Thus no one who could intervene would know about where they were during this attack until it's too late, leaving the kids on their own to defend themselves. And such could have been prevented by Aston telling Aspel of the danger Richard is in, so he wouldn't do something like this which might leave Richard vulnerable. As he didn't, however, Aspel is only showing the level of courtesy and caution that he would any other important guest that he feels is being mistreated, and trying his best to cheer them up with an amazing and impactful sight. From all evidence thus far, particularly his care towards Cheria, where he deliberately kept trying to leave her behind in town due to her illness, acting to prevent Sophie from falling off the cliff, and his noble conduct during his formal duel with Bryce earlier, had Aspel actually known about the danger, he would have acted differently and not deliberately taken Richard somewhere where something like this very situation would occur. But with Austin's regular do as I say berating and punishment of his sons, his warning without context just blended in with everything else Aston says to them. So how was he supposed to know? There is ultimately 3 interpretations one takes away from this once you have context that Aston knows about the assassination plots against the king and Richard, and him refusing in the past to be part of it has harmed Lhant overall. Either he is complicit in the assassination attempts, is enabling them, or he continues to be completely oblivious to them in negligence to the duties and faith placed upon him. None of these make Aston look good. None of them makes this event Aspel's fault, as he wasn't informed of the nature of the threats against Richard beforehand, as would have been the responsible thing to do so Aspel and Hubert wouldn't blindly believe someone that could be a murderer either. The former 2 views leave him conspiring with the traitors solely to restore the status of Lhant to how it was before his refusal, and in the last, his remaining obliviousness would leave open the door to further punish him for his hypocrisy by the entire event being blamed on him. Or rather, the easily available scapegoat that is Aspel. The impression from this as well is Bryce originally intended to kill Richard in a training accident. As no one seemed to catch on, you don't train a fencer by using a claw weapon. A death or mortal wounding in a training accident would be something that would absolve the Lhants of any blame. Thus why the two views of Aston being aware of the plan but doing nothing about it are there, as they are just as valid. But this hill being a cliff face comes up again, as in fear Richard backs away from the safe zone, leading Aspel and Sophie needing to grab him as he falls over it, him ultimately pulling them all over the cliff. They survive the fall, and no, this isn't a setting where people are super durable. That's still a lethal drop. Normally. And there is a plot-relevant reason why they're not dead.
リチャード大丈夫怪我はしてない
そうかよかった本当によかった
アスベル今嬉しい時の顔をしてるどうして嬉しいの
そんなのソフィーとリチャードが無事だったからに決まってるさ
私とリチャードが無事だから
And in gratitude for everything Aspel's done, the two forge a bond of friendship over it. Richard bestowing upon Aspel the signet ring of Windor that is a sign of one's faith and loyalty in the person. That ring, incidentally, is the one I mentioned earlier that acts as the key to unlocking Aspel's sword from the hilt. But again, it's not until late game where they learn about that, and the side quest that all comes as part actually involves recovering the sword since, well, Aspel ends up having to sell it to get the money to even enter the Knight Academy.
Well, how was I supposed to know that?
気を使って友情の誓いをやろう友情の誓い町の言い伝えにあるんだ木に名前を彫ってその前で手を合わせて誓いをすると叶うんだってそうよしこれでいいたとえこの先何があっても僕たちは友達でいよう
友達でいよ
うよしこれで俺たちはずっと友達だ
Famous last words.
ヒューバートとシェリアはいいの
What about Hubert and Cheria? There is, of course, Aston's expected blaming of Aspel for things that are his own fucking fault when they get back. Richard defending Aspel from the abuse. But seriously, fuck you, dude! This is seriously how he treats his kids all the damn time. It's really no wonder Aspel has no respect for him. Moreover, the only reason Hubert and Cheria did not immediately fess up to where they were when the search parties began looking for them is due to how unreasonable Aston is on a good day. Thus, knowing that he punches in excess of fault did not incentivize them to assisting them to act faster. Once more, blaming Aspel for that when it is a consequence of Aston's own conduct is ludicrous, as the kids as much trust Aston as Aspel does. Regardless of that, Aston also bears bad news for Richard, the king having taken ill in the single day that Richard has been away from the capital.
ここだけの話だが父の病は毒のせいらしいんだ
It was the poison for the king's poison, because his brother is trying to claim the crown. That is why they just had an assassination attempt, the king and his heir taken out in one fell swoop. It only didn't happen thanks to Aspel. And it's not like the king's brother Cedric stops this either. The next 7 years has Richard and his father constantly hounded by further assassination attempts until one of them ultimately works on the king after the time skip. But because of this, Richard has got to go back to the capital, and because Aston already has business in the capital, he's personally taking the prince back, along with Hubert.
泣くなケリー。ヒューバートのためだ。
Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you forever. Fuck yourselves. Go fuck yourselves, you fucks.
Going off on this a bit early, but this is the incitement of another reason why I consider Aston a scumbag and the root cause of everything that goes wrong, as he just sold Hubert to another family who live in the country of Strata. Why? To get Aspel to obey him. And this isn't out of nowhere. This has been a building side plot if you see certain scenes throughout the game, that Aston has unilaterally decided this against objections from Kerri, and to the obliviousness of the boys. All because Aspel is Aston's heir to the lordship, when Aspel would rather pass it off to Hubert because Hubert would be a better fit for the job the position entails. And Aspel's own goal in life is to be a knight of the realm, solving problems and serving the people out in the world, and not just in one territory his father has mismanaged. But again, as I've said before, Aston refuses to talk to anyone involved about his decision. He just unilaterally decided that Aspel was to be his heir, and that he needed to get rid of Hubert so Aspel would fall in line with his orders and demands. As now there's no fallback, so for Aspel to be responsible, he has to obey. And like everything, he'd entirely fucked it up, as now Aspel has even less reason to listen to him. And this gets worse when we are explained his reasoning for this. Oh no, this doesn't come from Aston himself, but from other people trying to bend over backwards to justify his actions. Aston's root reason for doing this is he ended up fighting for the lordship with his own brother as they couldn't agree over who should hold the position, after their father changed his mind after the two were adults and decided that Aston was better to take over as lord. Despite Aston's brother being of a better temperament for the role, all because Aston was physically stronger. That's it. Just more muscles, more aptitude for physical pursuits. That's the only reason. They fought, Aston won, and his brother was banished. And then Aston's brother died while he was in Fendel. That wouldn't have happened had the two not fallen out in the way they did. And because Aston cannot consider the possibility that he made the wrong choice, that his actions were wrong, he shifted the blame. That is in turn the vendetta I mentioned earlier that Aston spent over a decade carrying out, in vengeance against that act. Aston ordered the border to Fendel closed, and any attempt to approach the border has since been met with ever-escalating force against them, which at this point has led Fendel's own military to intervene and aggressively push back to physically open the border. This is also the central cause of why Lhant's militia is so short-handed. They've all been stuck or killed on that border. Hell, this same conflict is why Windor's king almost was killed, as Fendel believed this was a decision made by Windor's rulers. And why Kerri even was refused escort to leave after first arriving at the Lhant Manor, and Aston made his horrible first impression was because of another campaign over the border. And why is Fendel so adamant about getting past the border and reopening trade with Windor and Strata? They're dying. Again, skipping ahead a bit, but the planet this all takes place on is a world known as Athenia, and it is an artificial world created when an ancient civilization terraformed the moon of planet Phodra. Its atmosphere is maintained by a dome of water-like nanoparticles over the habitable zone that is in turn suspended by a technological ring, powered by the Eleth produced by the core of the planet, which the ring's rotation helps regulate and return to the core, creating a sustainable closed system. But that Eleth comes out from the core at 3 designated points, known as the Valkaness Krias, which then maintains the local environments of each region, with each Krias' strongest elemental focus being based around that region lacks. Windor is in the warmer hemisphere and has many water tributaries, but lacks natural wind flow which would otherwise cause them to bake. Thus their Valkaness Krias releases wind Eleth energy, which is then collected in Lhant. Strata is a desert that has wind and heat, but as a desert it lacks large water reserves. Thus the Valkaness there releases its Eleth in the form of water elemental energy that helps moisture remain in liquid form in the region. And Fendel is in the northern hemisphere, where there is a surplus of wind and ice, but is very cold. Thus the Valkanus releases fire Eleth to heat them up. The problem, as is explained after the time skip, is that their Valkanus is broken. The land is freezing to death as the crystal can no longer do its job to heat the region, and has been reliant on trade for wind Eleth to support the few remaining fire Eleth-based means of heat production they have left. And Aston's vendetta with the country over the actions of a few has not just denied them trade, but rejected diplomatic envoys and refugees leaving the country. They have at no point been allowed to talk this out. Because Strahd is a desert on another continent that requires ship travel to reach it, it can't sustain large population shifts, and has no way to sneak into its lands by those leaving it, thus leaving Windor and its vast open lands as a place of refuge and alternate supply lines that has been denied by just one man who was upset over his brother being killed, and believing he has the divine right to unilaterally close its country's borders when that is a decision that is not his to have made, as he is not the ruler of the entire damn country. The Lhants are stewards on behalf of the king over that land, and decisions like that should go through them. The only reason he hasn't been called out for it is simply because of the aforementioned saving the king from the Fendel assassin. And while it's not said outright, it wouldn't surprise me if that assassination attempt only happened because Fendel thinks the border closure was the king's fault because the border closure is literally killing them. And they've had all overtures to end hostility rejected by Aston. And we see how bad it's gotten for Fendel later in the game, where homes don't have heat or developed power, and the sole major city has to have massive steam engines power an entire pipeline setup below the region to keep them all from freezing. All available resources of Fendel have been thrown as Hail Mary last resort to save them, one of which will literally risk blowing the planet up because no one will talk to them and hear them out, all because of Aston. And the damnedest thing is, they legitimately are that desperate that if Aston would have just allowed them to talk, they'd likely give in to any concession he'd demand of them. But no, he's refused it for over a decade, and his refusal has only been making things worse for Lhant and Windor in the grand scheme. Again, skipping past this a bit to a later segment, but the leader of Fendel's daughter died because of this crisis in the country when a coup was plotted against him after this crisis started. The people believing the leadership was hoarding all the fire Eleth for themselves when they were just trying to preserve the few dregs they had left so they wouldn't all freeze from its waste. This happened so far back, it's why their leadership has backed more and more aggressive stances towards Windor, which all boils over after the time skip when the sins of the father start coming back to haunt their children. But of course, he wouldn't allow them to talk, because it might expose him to the reality that he was in the wrong. And that is not a reality Aston can accept. Thus, it must be denied. But to wrap around to the current context of all that, Hubert is as much paying the consequences of that incident as Fendel is. As to prevent that entire conflict of the Lhant's lands that led to his brother's death, once again, instead of admitting he was wrong to reject his brother as he did, he's acting to nip the problem in the bud and getting rid of his extra son. Aston has sold Hubert to the Oswald family that do not have an heir, and taken from Hubert everything he knows just to benefit Aspel. But neither Hubert nor Aspel want this. Hell, neither of them have been told about this. Aspel outright does not know, and Hubert is not told until he meets the man that his life is being sold to. The last words Hubert even hears of, and what festers in his head for years, is that this is his punishment for going along with Aspel's actions. So he's led to believe that this all happened because of Aspel's rebellion. And can you imagine what that does to a kid? What thoughts about not being good enough, inferior to one viewed as a troublemaker, can do to someone? One that has everything, including their mother, stolen from them, just to make their sibling, who didn't want what they were given except the showering of gifts and privilege? And this is being done as the ultimate consequence of another's disobedience? It is messed up. It is beyond messed up. But this is on Aston. His shifting of blame onto Aspel only lasts until you learn more of the motivations behind his decisions. And that just exposes how much of an asshole he actually is. Against expectations, Aspel does obey and stay in his room after leaving. Intentionally or no, he accepts that he did help endanger Richard's life. And that only lasts until Sophie busts him out, curious of the capital. The two running off on their own as Aspel tries to impress onto Sophie what the meaning of family is, and how they're different from friendships, in that a family is supposed to protect and support and care for one another. Aspel pledging to help Sophie find hers.
じゃあ、私がアスベルを守る。
The pair make it to the capital of Barona, where they incidentally run into Chiria, who was there for treatment, before managing to meet up with Richard and explore the town with him under the alias of...
タイガーフェスティバル。
それだ。
In exchange for the site Aspel showed, Richard in turn shows the group the site beyond the edge of Barona, a massive overlook of the lands of Windor, and how vast and open the country truly is. Gee, that could probably hold a fair number of displaced refugees from colder climates.
見なくて済む。僕はいつも疑問に思うんだ。どうして人と人の争いがなくならないんだろうって。僕は争いのない世界を作りたい。でもそんなの無理なのかな。やれるさ、お前なら。お前が王様になったらきっとそういう国になるよ。
Remember this, I'll have a tangent on it later. But as they return, well, this is where Aston catches Aspel in the city instead of at home, and as his negotiations for Hubert's turnover to the Oswalds went well, he doesn't punish Aspel for this, instead refusing to tell him that his beloved brother is no longer his brother.
僕は兄さんの弟だよね。
Hate this man. Richard decides to show them the inside of the castle, but due to the higher security, it will require they wait until it gets dark. But when that happens, Richard's uncle Cedric attempts another assassination, Richard only surviving by escaping into the catacombs beneath the castle, which only the kids know of existing due to their prior plans. They, however, don't know about this attempt, only sneaking in thinking that they were following their prior plan to meet up. So when they find him injured in the catacombs, no one knows where they are to even potentially come for help. Now, as said before, this is all running up against two things. Aspel's valid distrust for his father, and the coup plot, making it so they can't trust anyone that would normally be a guard for Richard to know of where they are. And thus, when they step into legitimate danger, no one can help them. And that is what causes the next turn of events, with a black and white spectral monster attacking the group when they find Richard. Sophie uniquely able to sense it, but the monster is so strong it sends Cherry and Hubert flying hard enough to mortally wound them, and for Sophie's memories in that moment to come rushing back, as that monster is her mortal enemy.
目を覚ました。アスベルが崖から落ちた時、あの時笑ってた理由、やっと分かった気がする。ゾンビ！
When Aspel comes to, all the kids are fine. They were found without any injuries on them. Again, plot point. But as for Sophie, no one could find her, all the adults believing her dead.
わかったか、アスベル。これがお前の軽率な行動が招いた結果だ。
Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you forever. Fuck yourselves. Go fuck yourselves, you fucks.
Worse, this is where Aston finally tells Aspel what he did to Hubert, and that is the breaking point regarding him and his father. Aston did this to make Aspel fall in line, likewise believing that Aspel, causing Sophie's death, would put an end once and for all to Aspel's recklessness. But what Aspel comes to realize is he can't stay here. Even if he was to blame for what happened to Sophie, which he wasn't, he could not redeem himself for his failures by remaining in this house, being ordered around by a man who doesn't care about people, but only the order of things in his domain.
あんた、いつでもそうだよ。大事なことも教えず、俺の話も聞こうとせず、押し付けるばっかりだ。
Where is he wrong? Point it out to me. Instead, Aspel seeks to redeem himself by becoming a Knight of Windor and abandon the lordship entirely. After all, Aston already threw away one son. What's to stop him from using even more underhanded means to bring the remaining one in line? And furthermore, if Aston believes Aspel to be that irresponsible, then why the hell would they want him to lead the region in the first place? And then there is the one that was left after it all. Cheria, who says the exact worst possible thing.
行かないで。お願いだから行かないで。私がソフィーやヒューバートの代わりにそばにいるから。
Like, do I even need to explain how wrong that is? You can't take the place of people like that. Thus, again, I can't fault Aspel's response.
代わりって。じゃあお前がヒューバートの代わりに俺の弟になるっていうのか。死んだソフィーの代わりにあいつの記憶取り戻すっていうのか。ヒューバートはもういない。ソフィーはもう二度と会うことさえできないんだぞ。
ごめん。
くそ。
And while he does apologize for being harsh, all his words are genuine. He can't stay here. If he did, he'd just end up hating everyone and thing that bound him here, including her. And he just cannot bring himself to hate her. And thus Aspel goes and enrolls in the Knights Academy of Windor. And time skips forward to 7 years later.
この剣の前に敵はない。